AI is a big topic and many people heard of AI. However, the question is, how do you actually build these natural language and LLM pipelines? And we have an expert on the matter here today, data scientist. Hello and welcome, Laura Funderburk.
Thank you so much for having me, Niels. It's great
Thank
to
you
be
very much
here.
for taking the time, and we're getting straight into it. So you wrote a brilliant new book. This is the new book that you just wrote, Building Natural Language and LLM Pipelines. My first question, of course, is what was your core motivation to actually get this book published? Because it's a highly developing topic. It's very demanding. It's very technical. It's not easy to write about. What was your core motivation to get the book written, get the book out there?
Yes, so as everybody has seen within the industry, building LLM applications is a very challenging topic because on the one hand, the technology advances very quickly, but at the same time, there's a very high demand for innovating with this technology.
Yeah.
And so part of the motivation for me for writing this book was to provide the readers with the tools necessary to build LLM applications that are at the cutting edge of technology by using two key frameworks, Haystack and LangGraph, but at the
Hmm.
same time, remain the applications or allow the applications to remain stable and ready for production. So that the key focus is production applications that use a large language model in the back end.
Mm. Excellent. So your core motivation also is probably that, of course, the quality of the outcome should be better than what we see at the market right today.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
what do without using too much jargon here, when people now read your book, what do they actually get out of that? Because probably we have some executives listening right now, and they say, "Look, I'm not a tech engineer, maybe. I'm probably not a tech expert. Is this still worth reading for me?" What's your take on that?
Of course, yes, it is. So the book is written in such a way that if you aren't a programmer, if you aren't a developer, you can still use the book to get up to speed with everything that's happened between 2023 up to today. You
Hmm.
can get an idea of what you can build with these applications. And then there's a second layer of the book that is specifically targeted towards the developer. So the book is written in two parts. The first is, of course, the theory. Where we get to break down the key concepts. We get to introduce the idea of prompt engineering, how it involved into context engineering. We get to introduce the topic of the cost analysis and how the total cost of ownership. So the executive who might be more interested in, how do I choose a model for the application, or how do I differentiate um, the key concepts that are important for my business. That area of the book is covered within the theoretical part of the book. And then the second part of the book is tailored towards the developer via the use of Jupyter notebooks and scripts within the repository.
So basically, it's a book which can be used by both groups, the management, the executives, and the IT, the tech people, the developers by themselves.
Yes,
Brilliant.
exactly.
Brilliant. Of course, when I prepared for this interview, I asked people out there, what are your main issues? And one question came up very frequently where executives said, look, we tried this, but we always failed from the point from actually prototype to production with an LLM. We prototyped, everything went well, and then we went into production and it didn't go too well from there. What are your opinion? What's your opinion? Why does this happen?
I think the reason it fails is because we tend to rely excessively on the LLM itself, as opposed to relying on software engineering principles and the rigor of data science.
Mm,
What makes this book different is that I'm arguing for reintroducing and using software engineering and data science rigor as the core foundation and treating the LLM as an add-on, as opposed to making the LLM the main character of the story.
mm. And also with the RAGs, of course, just for the people who are not into tech, the retrieval augmented generation, that is basically making it more reliable, not only relying on the
Exactly.
what it knows, it actually gets out
Exactly.
there and then finds the right
Yes.
solution then.
So the focus when we cover the topic of RAG within the book, the focus is of course on the data engineering,
Mm,
preparing the data, cleaning the data, chunking the data, storing the data into the appropriate database, and then retrieving the data. But again, when we talk about RAG, the LLM is just the add-on. The LLM is the final step. E- Everything that makes the LLM grounded in truth is the data science rigor that is involved in preparing the data for consumption so that when we ask the question, the LLM receives exactly the information that we need.
mm. Excellent. Of course, one aspect which people often say, okay, they say AI, big thing, we need to invest here, but then they say there are often these risk of hidden costs. We have the
Mhm.
initiative, the data, the evaluation, then the security aspect, then the change management around that. There are lots of hidden costs there. How can we avoid to fall into that trap saying, oh, we're also fascinated about the idea, this has big momentum right now, and so then falling for the trap of hidden costs afterwards?
Yes, so the biggest cost when it comes to building with LLMs is inference. And the hidden cost is, of course, inference, namely making the calls to the LLM. The LLM is typically hosted on a cloud server, and so the
Hmm.
hidden cost is either paying for the cloud provider to use their own LLM or us hosting our own LLM somewhere. The book addresses this via this idea of the concept of the total cost of ownership, where you you pay more upfront if you host your own LLM, but then once that hosting cost is paid for, you get inference for free, minus the cost of electricity, of course. Versus if you are choosing to rent your intelligence from somewhere else, say OpenAI or
Hmm.
Azure, then you don't pay as much upfront, but the cost is higher over time as you keep making these
Of course.
renting
Yeah.
prices. Yes.
Excellent. Another aspect which came up when I was preparing is people often say, okay, I have to choose as a manager and executive between fine-tuning, then the regs we talked about, or simply a prompt-based approach. How do I make the best decision? Because many managers and executives are very unsure because they feel they are not on the knowledge side of the game anymore. Because what they basically know is how to use ChatGPT or any kind of other publicly available
Mhm.
LLM. How can they make the right choice without putting themselves at risk and say, I'm probably signing off costs here, which might cost me my career in 2 years' time?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing is within present or within modern time, the industry has made a shift towards RAG, prompt engineering, and specifically context engineering. The book argues very heavily towards context engineering. When it comes to choosing, I would say first focus on what kind of data you are dealing with. Is it data that changes constantly? Is it data that requires specific knowledge? Is it data that you can put into a database once, forget about, and then uh sorry, I'm losing track of time. Is the data that you need to update regularly. If it's the kind of data that doesn't change often, you can pretty much focus on retrieval augmented generation, where the upfront cost is preparing that data once or I don't know, a
Hmm.
few times, and then putting into the database with maybe with some maintenance. If it involves highly technical knowledge, if it involves specific jargon that the LM is not necessarily trained to understand, then go for something like fine tuning. And then prompt engineering and context engineering are going to be givens in both fine tuning and RAG. Those are givens in both scenarios.
Mm. Excellent. And then, of course, we need to go to what we call good evaluation. So,
Mhm.
what does good evaluation look like for LLM systems, and why do actually many teams say we'd rather avoid it?
I'd say it's better not to skip evaluation. Evaluation is key because one of the key problems of working with LLMs is hallucinations.
Hmm.
And when it comes to building applications with LLMs today, there's two flavors of LLM applications. There's RAG and there's agents. And in
Mm.
both RAG and agents, it's very important that we spend time evaluating. RAG, the important thing is that the LLM is retrieving the right information and answering the right information. That's number one. With agents, it's very important to evaluate that the agent chooses the right tool for the job and then uses the right tool to answer the specific question. So I would say teams that are choosing not to evaluate are shooting themselves in the foot and creating a much
Hmm.
bigger problem down the line.
Yeah. And now, of course, they come up with immediately. But let's talk about, let's say, insurance or banking, finance related in industry, and they say, look, we want to do all of that. However, we are in a regulated environment, and now they ask us what governance and documentation actually should we do before we deploy something. So, what do you recommend here? Because that, of course, it's a huge area. What is the level of governance documentation you recommend before anything gets deployed?
Before anything gets deployed, I would definitely investigate regulation and particularly who the customer or who the end user is going to be. So insurance for an application where the end customer is a medical patient is very different from insurance where the client is somebody looking for entertainment or media.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would definitely suggest getting familiar with regulations for who the end user is going to be. If choosing something like medical or legal, of course, the insurance premiums are insane
Yeah.
because the liability is high.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, when we're dealing with high liability, we need to be even more constricted about evaluation and about choosing where and how the LLM is hosted so that private information isn't sent somewhere that the client wouldn't want their data to be sent. So, sovereignty, I think, is a very, very big topic when it comes to these applications. But when it comes to just address your question again, insurance, who is your target customer and what are the regulations for that target customer should be the two primary questions that should
Mm-hmm.
guide what LLM you're going to pick and how you're going to build your application.
Excellent. Perfect answer. And of course, when now people come up and say, look, our decision-making process in our company is based on use cases, based on business cases. And then people say, well, could do LLM or Rex, should we invest? Shouldn't we invest? Should we do something completely different with the money at the moment? What is one realistic use case where LLMs, in your opinion, consistently deliver value today, and probably one where they usually rather disappoint when it comes to results?
Context, I think, is the area that they excel at. Their ability to produce information and use that information to produce rich answers is, I think, one of their strong suits. I am particularly fond of large reasoning models because, in addition to having that contextual awareness, they also have the ability to reason. Large language models are very good at this context skill. Large reasoning models are particularly good at reasoning, and they tend to be very good at problem solving. When we equip them with the tools that I introduced in the book, what you end up building are these autonomous agents that can solve highly complex problems while
Hmm.
retaining reliability. So I think having the ability to use both either for producing answers that are rich in context or using them for solving problems that are complex, both use case scenarios I think make them unique and separate them from different kinds of unsupervised learning models.
Mm. Excellent, very good. And one last question I have, because quite a number of CIOs reacted when I asked them about what is interesting for you for this interview, and many came up with if they'd ask you for a 90-day plan, not 900, 90 to 90, for a 90-day plan to get an LLM capability live, but responsibly live, because
Mhm.
they often get asked by executives who do not hold tech expertise, hey, we need something that we need to show to our shareholders, to our owners, to our investors. So what's your take on if any CIO asks you for a 90-day plan to get an LLM capability responsibly live, what would your answer be?
So I would spend uh, I would say the first quarter of those 90 days with what's known as discovery, namely, what problem are we going to solve? We're not going to set up an LLM up in the air for 90 days just because it's cool or fancy. We always want to connect it to the business needs and the business problems that we're trying to solve. So number one, spend maybe the first quarter of that time identifying a business problem and then map out how the LLM is going to solve it. If the business problem is we want to have a model that can interactively answer questions about our knowledge base, that is going to be the business problem. So the first quarter of that time is going to be about discovery. What is our data? What is our problem? And then what is our infrastructure in place to solve our problem? From there, again, the first phase when it comes to implementing an LLM based solution is the data. Data quality is the highest priority, making sure that you have the infrastructure necessary to prepare, ingest, and serve data. And then so that would be, I don't know, maybe the first month,
Hmm.
discovery and data preparation. Implementation, of course, once involves setting up these pipelines. And the book I write talks about how to set up pipelines for ingestion and indexing. So setting up these pipelines, deploying the pipelines as microservices. The microservice itself is a REST API, so we can spend from day 30 to day 60 with the pipelines, deploying the pipelines as a REST API. And then the last part can be around the agent itself. Once you have the pipelines, a human can use the pipelines as a REST API to retrieve data and obtain information. The last 30 days can be about innovation with an LLM as an agent. Once the pipelines are deployed as a service, the last phase can be how do I power an agent to use the pipelines autonomously? And then of course, the last 30 days should also be about the user interface. You don't want to give the user just a raw REST API. You want to give them a user interface. So you would incorporate a UX UI team that develops a user interface that has these pipelines as the backend or that has the agent as the backend. So I would say that's my 90-day plan from prototype all the way to production with a UI UX that has REST APIs in the backend.
And I think that was a really, really strong answer. So when now someone says, "Hey, I think Laura can really help us with this project," how can people get in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Laura Funderburk.
Hmm.
I'm always happy to provide information and provide consulting information regarding how to set up these solutions, and I'm very happy to talk. I would say LinkedIn is the best way to reach me.
Brilliant. Building natural language and LLM pipelines, build production grade racks, tool contracts, and context engineering with Haystack and LangGraph. We've seen this book is not only brilliant, but also the person who wrote it is clearly as is you, basically just demonstrated here
Thank you.
today. So at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Laura, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. Thank you, Niels.